In the vastness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that both allies and enemies learn too late: never underestimate the quiet ones. They are the storm that builds in silence, the weapon forged in the shadows of doubt, the force that emerges when all hope seems lost. Captain Sarah Chen had been called many things throughout her career: reckless, insubordinate, a loose cannon who couldn't follow orders. Her own command questioned her methods, her allies whispered about her unconventional tactics, and her enemies dismissed her as just another human officer playing at war among the stars. But, in the deepest reaches of the Andromeda sector, where the hegemony's iron grip was tightening around the throats of free worlds, something extraordinary was about to unfold. A series of impossible victories, strategies that defied logic, and a human spirit that refused to break would soon force an entire galaxy to confront a terrifying reality. The enemy high command would eventually issue a single, chilling declaration that would echo across star systems: forget their fleets. Forget their weapons. There is only one target that matters: find the human female. She is our greatest danger. This is the story of how doubt became fear, how dismissal turned to desperation, and how one underestimated woman became the most hunted individual in known space. The emergency klaxons wailed through the corridors of Deep Space Station Omega-7 as Captain Sarah Chen strode purposefully toward the briefing room. Her worn combat boots clicked against the metal flooring in a rhythm that had become familiar to her crew over the past 3 years. Behind her, the station bustled with activity as officers and enlisted personnel scrambled to prepare for what many believed would be humanity's final stand in the Andromeda sector. Sarah's reflection caught her eye in a passing viewport. At 34, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had survived more battles than most officers twice her age. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes held an intensity that made both allies and enemies uncomfortable. Scars traced thin lines along her left temple, souvenirs from the Battle of Kepler 442b, where she had single-handedly held a defensive line for 18 hours while her superiors argued over strategy. The briefing room fell silent as she entered. Admiral Marcus Webb sat at the head of the long table, his withered face bearing the weight of countless defeats. Around the table sat representatives from 7 different allied species, their various forms of communication equipment translating every word into a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and synthesized speech. The air itself seemed thick with tension and the bitter taste of desperation. "Captain Chen," Admiral Webb began, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who had watched too many good soldiers die. "Thank you for joining us. Please, take a seat." Sarah remained standing, her hands clasped behind her back. She had learned early in her career that showing deference to incompetent leadership often led to more deaths than necessary. "With respect, Admiral, I'll stand. I have a feeling this briefing will be brief." A few of the alien representatives shifted uncomfortably. The Zenthari ambassador, a tall insectoid creature with 4 arms and compound eyes, clicked his mandibles in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of nervous laughter. The Corvan general, a hulking reptilian being covered in natural armor, simply stared at her with unblinking yellow eyes. Admiral Webb cleared his throat and activated the holographic display at the center of the table. A 3-dimensional map of the Andromeda sector materialized, showing the current positions of Allied and enemy forces. Red indicators representing hegemony fleets vastly outnumbered the scattered blue dots marking Allied positions. "As you can see," Webb continued, "our situation has deteriorated significantly over the past month. The hegemony has successfully captured 14 systems, and their advance shows no signs of slowing. Intelligence suggests they're mobilizing for a final push that will effectively end our resistance in this sector." Sarah studied the display with practiced eyes. She had seen similar maps dozens of times before, each one showing humanity and its allies in increasingly desperate situations. What frustrated her most wasn't the odds they faced, but the predictable responses her commanders always chose. "Our best analysts," Webb continued, gesturing toward a thin man with thick glasses who nodded eagerly, "have calculated 3 possible defensive strategies. We can consolidate our forces around the Proxima defense grid, attempt to establish a new line at the Vega system, or conduct a fighting withdrawal to the Terra sector." The alien representatives began speaking simultaneously, their translated voices creating a chaos of strategic opinions. The Zenthari favored the withdrawal, their species having survived numerous extinction events through tactical retreats. The Corvan general insisted on making a stand at Proxima, his warrior culture viewing retreat as the ultimate dishonor. The other species offered variations on these themes, each proposal more conservative than the last. Sarah listened to the debate with growing impatience. She had seen this same pattern repeat itself across a dozen star systems. Allied Command would analyze the situation, propose defensive measures, implement half-hearted strategies, and, then, retreat when the hegemony's superior numbers overwhelmed their positions. It was a slow-motion defeat, death by committee decision-making. Captain Chen, Admiral Webb said, finally, addressing her directly. "You've been unusually quiet. What are your thoughts on our options?" The room fell silent again. Sarah knew that every eye was on her, waiting to hear what the infamous loose cannon would propose this time. She had a reputation for unconventional tactics and insubordinate behavior, earned through a series of incidents where she had disobeyed orders to save civilian populations or protect retreating forces. "With all due respect, Admiral," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear, "all three of your proposals are variations on the same theme. Retreat, consolidate, hope for the best. We've been fighting this war defensively for 3 years, and we've lost ground every single time." Admiral Webb's jaw tightened. "Captain, we're dealing with overwhelming numerical superiority. The hegemony has resources we can't hope to match. Conservative tactics are our best hope for survival." Sarah stepped closer to the holographic display, her fingers dancing through the light as she manipulated the controls. The map shifted, showing hegemony supply lines, manufacturing centers, and fleet deployment patterns. "The hegemony's strength isn't in their numbers," she said, highlighting specific points on the map. "It's in their predictability. They follow doctrine religiously, they commit resources based on mathematical formulas, and they assume their enemies will behave rationally." She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "That's exactly what we've been doing. Being rational. Being predictable." The Zenthuri ambassador leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic light. "You propose irrationality as a military strategy, human?" Sarah smiled, an expression that several of her former enemies had described as distinctly unsettling. "I propose being human. Doing what they don't expect, striking where they think we won't, and making decisions that their computers can't predict." General Korvak, the reptilian representative, let out a sound that might have been a laugh. "The human speaks of glory in death. Perhaps there is honor in your species after all." "I'm not talking about dying gloriously," Sarah replied, manipulating the display again to show a new tactical overview. "I'm talking about making them afraid to advance. Right now, they move forward because they know exactly how we'll respond. We need to change that calculation." Admiral Webb leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. "And how do you propose we accomplish this miracle, Captain?" Sarah's smile widened. "We stop defending their objectives and start attacking their assumptions. They expect us to protect population centers, so we evacuate them and turn them into traps. They expect us to preserve our fleets, so we send smaller forces on deep raids that target their industrial capacity. They expect us to follow the rules of engagement, so we rewrite the rules." The room erupted in discussion. The alien representatives began arguing among themselves, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the rapid exchange of tactical concepts. Some seemed intrigued by Sarah's proposals, while others appeared horrified by the implications. Captain Chen, Admiral Webb said, his voice cutting through the noise, "What you're describing sounds dangerously close to terrorism. We have civilians to protect, international law to uphold, and alliance agreements to honor." Sarah's expression hardened. "Admiral, the hegemony has killed over 2 billion sentients in this sector alone. They don't take prisoners, they don't recognize surrenders, and they've made it clear that their goal is complete extermination of non-hegemony life. At what point do we stop worrying about looking civilized and start worrying about survival?" The Zenthuri ambassador clicked his mandibles rapidly, a sign of deep agitation. "The human female proposes abandoning the very principles that unite our alliance. Without these ethical constraints, we become no better than our enemies." "No," Sarah said, turning to face the insectoid directly. "We become unpredictable. We become dangerous. We become something they can't calculate and control. She gestured toward the holographic display. Look at their expansion pattern. Every victory they've achieved has come because they could predict our response time, our deployment patterns, our tactical priorities. They're fighting an enemy they understand completely. General Korvac stood slowly, his massive frame towering over the table. The human speaks wisdom, though she wraps it in questionable methods. In my experience, wars are won by those willing to do what their enemies cannot imagine. Admiral Webb shook his head. Captain, your proposals are too risky. We can't authorize operations that might result in massive civilian casualties or diplomatic incidents. The Alliance Council would never approve such measures. Sarah had expected this response. She had spent 3 years watching good people die because committee decisions took precedence over tactical necessity. Then, don't authorize them, Admiral. Give me a ship and a volunteer crew. Let me demonstrate what unconventional warfare can accomplish. The room fell silent again. Sarah could see the conflict in Webb's eyes. She knew he was a good man, a capable officer who genuinely cared about the lives under his command. But she also knew he was trapped by a system that prioritized consensus over action. Captain Shen, Webb said finally, you're asking me to send you on what amounts to a suicide mission with no backup, no official support, and no guarantee that your tactics will actually work. I'm asking you to let me try something different, Sarah replied. Because what we're doing now isn't working. Every day we debate strategy is another day the hegemony advances. Every committee meeting is another star system we lose. The alien representatives had resumed their discussion, but Sarah noticed that the tone had shifted. Several of them seemed to be considering her proposals, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. The Zenthuri ambassador appeared particularly thoughtful, his compound eyes reflecting the tactical displays in complex patterns. There is precedent, the Zenthuri said suddenly, his translated voice cutting through the noise. During the Third Swarming Wars, my people employed similar tactics against the Void Hunters. Unconventional methods, asymmetric warfare, psychological operations designed to disrupt enemy decision-making patterns. General Korvac nodded slowly. The Corvin military archives contain references to human tactical innovation during their early space conflicts. Your species has a documented history of achieving victory against superior forces through unpredictable methods. Admiral Webb looked around the table, reading the expressions of his allies. Sarah could see him calculating political ramifications, weighing the potential consequences of supporting her proposals against the certainty of continued defeats. Captain, he said finally, suppose I were to approve this unconventional approach. What would you need? Sarah had been preparing for this question for weeks. A fast ship, preferably something with stealth capabilities. A crew of volunteers who understand they won't be coming home unless we change the strategic situation. Complete operational autonomy once we're in the field. And, most importantly, no communication with Fleet Command until the mission is complete. The last requirement is unacceptable, Webb said immediately. I can't have officers operating independently without any oversight or coordination. Admiral, Sarah said, her voice taking on an edge of frustration, the hegemony has been monitoring our communications for months. They know our codes, they've hacked our encryption, and they've been using our own intelligence reports against us. Every time we send a message, we tell them exactly where we are and what we're planning. The truth of this statement was undeniable. Allied forces had suffered numerous defeats due to compromised communications, ambushes that suggested the enemy had advance warning of their movements, and tactical responses that seemed to anticipate their strategies. The Zenthuri ambassador leaned forward again. The human female raises a valid concern. Our communication networks have been compromised repeatedly. Perhaps operational independence is not just preferable, but necessary. Admiral Webb rubbed his temples, showing the strain of command decisions that carried the weight of entire civilizations. Captain Shen, what you're proposing goes against every principle of military hierarchy and operational coordination. If I approve this, and your mission fails, I'll be held responsible for the consequences. Sarah stepped closer to the table, placing her hands on its surface as she leaned forward. Admiral, with respect, we're already failing. The current strategy isn't working, our allies are losing confidence, and the hegemony is advancing unopposed. At some point, the risk of trying something different becomes less than the certainty of defeat through conventional methods. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Sarah could see Webb struggling with the decision, weighing his duty to follow established procedures against his responsibility to find a way to win this war. General Korvac broke the silence with a statement that surprised everyone present. "I volunteer to provide support for the humans' mission. The Corvan fleet will assign our fastest scout ship and a crew of warriors who understand the value of unconventional tactics." The Zenthari ambassador clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "The collective will also contribute resources. Our research indicates that psychological warfare can be highly effective against species that rely heavily on predictable behavior patterns." One by one, the other alien representatives offered support for Sarah's proposal. Ships, crews, equipment, intelligence resources, all pledged to an operation that their own command structures might never officially approve. Admiral Webb looked around the table in amazement. "I'm not sure whether to be impressed or terrified by what just happened here." Sarah straightened, feeling a familiar mixture of anticipation and determination. "Admiral, give me 6 months. If unconventional warfare doesn't change the strategic situation in that time, I'll return and submit to whatever disciplinary action you deem appropriate." Webb was quiet for a long moment, staring at the holographic display that showed the relentless advance of hegemony forces. Finally, he looked up at Sarah with an expression that mixed resignation with a thin hope. "Captain Chen," he said, "I'm officially assigning you to deep reconnaissance operations in the outer Andromeda sectors. Your mission parameters are classified, your operational methods are at your discretion, and your communication schedule is flexible." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "Unofficially, I'm giving you permission to be as unpredictable as you think necessary." Sarah nodded once, sharply. "Thank you, Admiral. You won't regret this decision." As she turned to leave the briefing room, General Korvac called after her. "Human female, there is an old Corvan saying, the enemy fears most what they cannot understand. Make them fear you." Sarah paused at the doorway and looked back at the assembled representatives. "General, by the time I'm finished, they'll understand exactly why they should have taken humanities seriously from the beginning." The door closed behind her, leaving the Allied command to contemplate what they had just set in motion. None of them could have predicted that within 6 months, Captain Sarah Chen would become the most wanted individual in hegemony space, or that her name would be spoken in whispers across 1,000 worlds as the human who taught the galaxy what it truly meant to fight like humanity had nothing left to lose. 3 weeks after the briefing at Deep Space Station Omega-7, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the HSV Relentless, watching her hand-picked crew prepare for what would either be the most successful unconventional warfare operation in Alliance history or a spectacular failure that would be remembered as a footnote in humanity's defeat. The ship itself was a testament to the desperate creativity that had become humanity's trademark, a heavily modified Corvan scout vessel equipped with Zenthari stealth technology and human engineering innovations that technically violated several safety regulations. Lieutenant Commander James Park, her executive officer and the only crew member who had served under her command before, approached with a datapad containing their first target analysis. Park was one of the few officers in the Alliance fleet who understood Sarah's tactical philosophy, having witnessed her unorthodox methods during the defense of the Kepler system. His lean frame and prematurely gray hair made him look older than his 31 years, but his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who had learned to think 3 moves ahead of conventional military doctrine. "Captain," Park said quietly, his voice barely audible over the subtle hum of the ship's modified engines, "we've completed the analysis of the hegemony supply depot at Arcturus 7. Intelligence confirms it's a major logistics hub serving their forward operating bases in 12 adjacent systems." Sarah accepted the datapad and scrolled through the tactical information, her expression growing more focused as she absorbed the details. Arcturus 7 was exactly the kind of target that conventional alliance strategy would ignore, heavily defended, strategically important, and completely unexpected as an objective for a single ship mission. "Defensive capabilities?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be formidable. 16 heavy weapons platforms, a garrison of approximately 2,000 hegemony Marines, and at least 3 patrol squadrons operating regular sweeps of the system perimeter, Park replied. Alliance Command classifies it as a hardened target requiring a minimum of 4 heavy cruisers and supporting elements to assault successfully.
Sarah smiled, the same unsettling expression that had made Admiral Webb uncomfortable during their briefing.
Perfect. They'll never expect a single ship to target a facility they consider impregnable.
The bridge crew exchanged glances that mixed admiration with concern.
Over the past 3 weeks, Sarah had assembled a team of volunteers from across the Alliance fleet, each one personally recommended for their ability to think creatively under pressure. Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez, a human marine who had earned her reputation in close-quarters combat, was cross-training with Corban assault specialists in boarding techniques that emphasized speed and psychological impact. Lieutenant Zara Okafor, their communications officer, had been working with Zen-3 technical advisors to develop new methods for electronic warfare that exploited weaknesses in hegemony computer systems. The diversity of the crew was intentional. Sarah had learned that the most effective unconventional operations combined the strengths of different species and cultures in ways that created tactical advantages no single group could achieve. The Corvan warriors brought raw aggression and fearlessness in close combat. The Zen-3 contributed analytical precision and technological innovation. The humans provided adaptability and the willingness to take risks that other species found recklessly dangerous. "Ma'am," called out Ensign Torres from the sensor station, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Alliance Command. Admiral Webb is requesting a status report." Sarah considered this for a moment. She had been operating under communication silence for 3 weeks, using the time to train her crew and gather intelligence without alerting hegemony forces to their presence. Breaking that silence now would potentially compromise their first mission before it began. Send a brief acknowledgement, she decided. Tell Admiral Webb we're proceeding with Phase 1 operations and will provide detailed reports after mission completion. Encrypt it using the backup cipher we established before departure. As Torres transmitted the message, Sarah turned her attention to the main tactical display. The Arcturus system appeared as a three-dimensional hologram, showing the position of the supply depot, patrol routes, and defensive installations in precise detail. What made this target particularly interesting wasn't just its strategic value, but its psychological significance to hegemony forces throughout the sector. The depot isn't just a logistics center, Sarah explained to her gathered senior staff. According to our intelligence, it's also a training facility where hegemony commanders learn advanced tactical doctrine. Destroying it will eliminate critical supplies, but, more importantly, it will demonstrate that nowhere in their territory is truly safe from attack. Commander Park nodded thoughtfully. A psychological operation as much as a military strike. But, Captain, the defensive systems are designed specifically to prevent exactly this type of raid. Our single ship won't have the firepower to overwhelm their orbital platforms. Which is why we're not going to fight them conventionally, Sarah replied, manipulating the holographic display to highlight specific features of the depot's infrastructure. The hegemony designs their defensive systems based on mathematical models that assume rational behavior from attackers. They calculate fields of fire, response times, and tactical probabilities based on what their computers determine is the most logical approach to assault their positions. She zoomed in on a section of the depot that appeared to be primarily concerned with waste management and recycling operations. This facility processes organic waste from 12 systems. Every day, transport ships arrive with cargo that gets sorted, processed, and either recycled or disposed of. The hegemony considers the support infrastructure to be so mundane that it's barely guarded compared to their weapons storage and command centers. Sergeant Major Vasquez leaned forward, her scarred face showing the beginning of understanding. You want to infiltrate through their garbage disposal system. I want to become their garbage disposal system, Sarah corrected. The hegemony's greatest weakness is their absolute dependence on predictable systems and procedures. They've created a military machine so efficient that it can't adapt when faced with tactics that don't fit their established parameters. Lieutenant Okafor raised a technical concern. Captain, even if we can infiltrate the facility, we'll need to neutralize their communication systems before they can alert patrol squadrons to our presence. Their quantum encryption is supposedly unbreakable using current Alliance technology. Sarah's expression became predatory. Their encryption is unbreakable if you try to decode it using conventional methods. But what happens if you don't bother decoding it and instead introduce malicious code that mimics their own system diagnostics? The Zenthri technical advisor, a thin insectoid named Clix who had volunteered for the mission despite his species' typically conservative nature, clicked his mandibles, and what Sarah had learned was equivalent to excited approval. A virus that appears to be routine maintenance rather than an attack. The system would spread the infection itself while believing it was performing standard operations. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. We hit them with attacks that look like system malfunctions, accidents, and maintenance issues until they're too confused to mount an effective defense. By the time they realize they're under assault, we'll have already accomplished our primary objectives. The plan that emerged over the following hours was unlike anything in standard Alliance tactical doctrine. Rather than attempting to overwhelm the depot's defenses through superior firepower, they would infiltrate the facility using a captured hegemony waste transport, plant explosive devices disguised as replacement equipment components, and introduce computer viruses that would cripple their communication and defensive systems from within. The preparation phase required skills that weren't typically taught in military academies. Sergeant Major Vasquez worked with the Corban assault specialists to develop silent infiltration techniques that emphasized stealth over aggression. Lieutenant Okafor collaborated with Clix to create virus packages that would appear to be routine software updates when introduced into hegemony computer networks. The human engineers modified standard Alliance explosive devices to look like legitimate hegemony equipment components. 2 days before the planned operation, Sarah called her senior staff together for a final briefing. The conference room of the Relentless was cramped, designed for a crew half the size of the diverse team they had assembled, but the close quarters had fostered a sense of unity that transcended species barriers. Before we proceed, Sarah began, I need everyone to understand what we're really attempting here. This isn't just a raid on a supply depot. We're trying to demonstrate that unconventional warfare can be effective against an enemy that has been defeating us through superior numbers and conventional tactics. Commander Park leaned back in his chair, studying the tactical projections on his datapad. Captain, the Alliance has attempted unconventional operations before. Most of them failed because they relied on individual heroics rather than systematic tactical innovation. How is this different? Sarah had been expecting this question. Previous unconventional operations failed because they were still trying to win through conventional victory conditions. They attempted to hold territory, capture strategic objectives, or eliminate enemy forces using unexpected methods. We're not trying to win a battle in the traditional sense. She activated the room's holographic display, showing not just the Arcturus depot but the entire regional map of hegemony operations. Our goal is to change the enemy's decision-making process. Right now, hegemony commanders advance because they can calculate the risks and benefits of each operation with mathematical precision. They know how Alliance forces will respond, how long it will take us to mount counterattacks, and what defensive measures we're likely to employ. The display shifted to show projected hegemony expansion patterns based on current tactical assumptions. If we can introduce uncertainty into their calculations, if we can make them afraid to advance without extensive reconnaissance and preparation, then we've achieved something more valuable than destroying a single depot. We've bought time for the Alliance to develop new strategies and deploy additional resources. Sergeant Major Vasquez nodded slowly. Psychological warfare on a strategic scale. Make them paranoid and cautious instead of confident and aggressive. Precisely, Sarah confirmed. The hegemony's greatest strength is their ability to process information and make optimal tactical decisions faster than any other military force in the galaxy. But that strength becomes a weakness when the information they're processing is unreliable or the tactical situations they face don't conform to established patterns. Clix clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. An interesting application of chaos theory to military strategy. Small, unpredictable inputs creating large-scale changes in enemy behavior patterns. The final day of preparation was spent in careful rehearsal and equipment checks. Every team member practiced their assigned roles until they could perform them perfectly even under stress. The computer viruses were tested against simulated hegemony networks, the explosive devices were calibrated for maximum psychological impact, and the infiltration routes were memorized down to the smallest detail. As the Relentless approached the outer edge of the Arcturus system, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and focus that preceded every major operation. The ship's stealth systems were operating at maximum efficiency, rendering them virtually invisible to long-range sensors, but she knew that closer inspection by hegemony patrols would reveal their presence. "Captain," reported Torres from the sensor station, "we're detecting 3 patrol squadrons operating standard search patterns around the depot. No indication they've noticed our approach, but they're maintaining overlapping sensor coverage of all major approach vectors." Sarah studied the tactical display, watching the geometric patterns created by the patrol ship's movements. Like everything else about hegemony military operations, the patrols followed mathematical precision that left no gaps in their coverage but also made their future positions completely predictable. "Plot an intercept course for Patrol Squadron Alpha 7, she ordered. "We're going to borrow one of their waste transports." The next phase of the operation required split-second timing and absolute precision. The Relentless approached the hegemony patrol from below the system's ecliptic plane, using gravitational distortions from a nearby asteroid field to mask their sensor signature. When they were within optimal range, Clix activated the virus package designed to temporarily disable the patrol ship's communication systems. From the patrol ship's perspective, they were experiencing a routine communications system malfunction that required investigation. Standard hegemony procedure called for the affected vessel to conduct diagnostic procedures while maintaining position until technical difficulties could be resolved. What they couldn't detect was the Relentless matching their velocity and approaching from their sensor blind spot. "Boarding team, prepare for silent infiltration," Sarah commanded, watching as Sergeant Major Vasquez led her mixed-species assault group toward the airlock. The plan called for complete stealth: capture the patrol ship's crew without alerting the other squadrons, secure their waste transport vessel, and plant evidence suggesting the crew had encountered a mechanical failure that required emergency landing at the depot. 23 minutes later, Vasquez reported mission success. The hegemony patrol ship was under Alliance control, its crew unconscious but unharmed, and their waste transport was ready for the infiltration phase of the operation. More importantly, the other patrol squadrons had detected nothing unusual about the brief communication blackout that had preceded the capture. "Phase 2 is ready to proceed, Captain," Commander Park reported. "The transport vessel has been loaded with our infiltration team and equipment. Computer analysis indicates a 97% probability that depot security will clear us for approach and docking." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of command decisions that would determine not just the success of this mission, but potentially the future direction of the war itself. Initiate Phase 2. All teams, remember that from this point forward, we're not Alliance military personnel. We're hegemony waste management workers conducting routine operations. The captured transport ship approached the Arcturus depot along the prescribed shipping lane, transmitting the appropriate identification codes and cargo manifests. From the depot's perspective, this was exactly the kind of mundane supply operation that occurred dozens of times each day. The security protocols were designed to prevent military assault, not to detect infiltrators disguised as service personnel. As the transport docked with the depot's receiving bay, Sarah watched through the ship's sensors as her carefully trained team began what would become known throughout the galaxy as the operation that changed the fundamental nature of interstellar warfare. None of them could have predicted that this single mission would force the hegemony to completely restructure their military doctrine, or that Captain Sarah Chen's name would soon be transmitted across enemy communication networks with a priority level reserved for existential threats to their empire. The storm that Admiral Webb had unleashed was about to announce itself to the galaxy with a voice that spoke in explosions, chaos, and the terrifying realization that humanity had finally decided to fight like the dangerous, unpredictable species they had always been beneath their veneer of civilization. The Arcturus 7 supply depot exploded at exactly 1437 Galactic Standard Time, but the fireworks had been building for 6 hours before anyone realized they were under attack. By the time hegemony forces understood what was happening, Captain Sarah Chen and her team had already rewritten the rules of engagement for the entire war. The operation began with Lieutenant Clix introducing computer viruses into the depot's waste management system during what appeared to be a routine maintenance inspection. The insectoid's forearms moved with mechanical precision as he connected diagnostic equipment to various terminals, uploading malicious code disguised as software updates while maintaining the appearance of standard technical procedures. "Waste processing efficiency has improved by 12%, Clix reported through his communicator, speaking in perfect hegemony standard while his mandibles clicked with barely controlled excitement. "System diagnostics indicate no anomalies requiring immediate attention." What the depot's security personnel couldn't detect was that those efficiency improvements were actually routing critical communications through compromised servers that would give Sarah's team access to the facility's entire information network. Every security report, duty roster, and operational directive was now being copied to hidden servers that made the depot's defenses as transparent as glass. 2 levels below the main docking facility, Sergeant Major Vasquez led a mixed team of human marines and Corvan warriors through maintenance tunnels that hadn't been inspected by security personnel in over 8 months. The hegemony's obsession with mathematical efficiency had led them to focus their defensive resources on areas that tactical analysis indicated were most likely to be targeted by enemy forces. Unfortunately for them, their mathematical models didn't account for enemies willing to crawl through sewage systems and waste recycling plants. Target Alpha is in position, Vasquez whispered into her throat microphone as her team reached the primary power distribution center. The explosive device they were planting looked identical to a standard hegemony power coupling, complete with authentic serial numbers and maintenance logs that Clix had fabricated using captured manufacturing data. Similar reports came in from teams positioned throughout the facility. Each explosive device was designed not just to cause maximum damage, but to create specific patterns of system failures that would appear to be cascading equipment malfunctions rather than coordinated sabotage. The hegemony's reliance on computerized analysis would work against them when their own diagnostic systems reported that the depot was suffering from a series of unrelated technical problems rather than enemy action. Captain Sarah Chen remained aboard the captured waste transport, monitoring communications and coordinating the operation with the cold precision of someone playing a 3-dimensional chess game against opponents who didn't know the game had started. Her command post consisted of a cramped compartment filled with monitoring equipment that had been cleverly disguised as waste sorting machinery, allowing her to observe every aspect of the depot's operations without arousing suspicion. Captain Commander Park reported from the transport's bridge, Hegemony patrol squadrons are maintaining standard search patterns. No indication they suspect anything unusual about our presence here. Sarah studied the tactical display showing the positions of enemy forces throughout the system. 3 patrol squadrons, 16 defensive platforms, and approximately 2,000 Marines represented overwhelming firepower by any conventional measurement. But conventional measurements didn't account for enemies who were willing to turn the depot's own systems against itself. Phase 3 initiating in 90 seconds, she announced to her dispersed teams. Remember, timing is critical. We need simultaneous system failures across 17 different locations to maintain the illusion of technical malfunction rather than coordinated attack. The beauty of the plan lay in its exploitation of the hegemony's greatest organizational strength. Their military machine was so efficient, so precisely coordinated, that it couldn't adapt quickly when faced with problems that didn't fit established response protocols. When multiple systems began failing simultaneously, their standard procedure called for technical teams to investigate each problem individually while command personnel attempted to identify common factors that might indicate systematic issues. What they found instead was chaos that looked like coincidence. At 1431, the depot's primary communication array suffered what appeared to be a routine transmitter failure that required immediate diagnostic attention. Standard protocol called for backup systems to maintain essential communications while technical teams investigated the malfunction. At 1432, the backup communication system experienced a similar failure, triggering emergency procedures that required evacuation of non-essential personnel from the communications center. At 1433, power fluctuations began affecting lighting systems throughout the facility, creating intermittent blackouts that interfered with security camera coverage. At 1434, the waste recycling system reported critical errors that threatened to contaminate the facility's water supply unless immediately addressed by emergency response teams. Each problem appeared to be unrelated to the others. Each required immediate attention from specialized personnel. Each drew security forces and technical teams away from their normal positions and created gaps in the depot's defensive coverage that Sarah's infiltration teams exploited with ruthless efficiency. All teams report successful placement, Sergeant Major Vasquez confirmed at 1436. Explosive devices are armed and ready for remote detonation. Virus packages have been uploaded to primary and backup computer networks. Infiltration teams are moving to extraction points. Sarah watched the chronometer tick toward 1437, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether unconventional warfare could truly change the strategic balance of the war. The explosions themselves were only the beginning of what she hoped would be a psychological victory that would make hegemony commanders question their basic assumptions about Alliance capabilities.
Detonate, she ordered.
The first explosion occurred in the depot's primary power generation facility, where Sarah's team had replaced a critical transformer with an explosive device that created an electromagnetic pulse capable of disabling electronic systems throughout the complex. From the perspective of depot personnel, this appeared to be a catastrophic equipment failure that immediately triggered emergency shutdown procedures for all non-essential systems. The second explosion destroyed the backup power facility 3 seconds later, plunging large sections of the depot into darkness and forcing emergency lighting systems to activate. Security personnel found themselves operating in reduced visibility while dealing with communication systems that had been compromised hours earlier. Explosions 3 through 12 targeted specific defensive systems and weapons platforms, creating what appeared to be a chain reaction of equipment failures caused by power fluctuations from the initial power plant explosion. The hegemony's own technical manuals indicated that such cascading failures were possible during major electrical emergencies, making it difficult for command personnel to immediately recognize that they were under coordinated attack. Explosions 13 through 17 targeted the depot's computer network infrastructure, destroying servers and communication nodes while appearing to be secondary damage from the power system failures. By the time hegemony forces realized they were dealing with enemy action rather than technical malfunction, their ability to coordinate defensive responses had been severely compromised. Transport teams, initiate emergency departure, Sarah commanded as the depot's defensive systems began shutting down in a cascade of apparent equipment failures.
All personnel returned to extraction points immediately.
The genius of the operation lay not just in its execution, but in its aftermath. As emergency response teams struggled to restore power and communications, they discovered evidence that suggested the depot had been infiltrated weeks earlier by a sophisticated intelligence operation. Computer logs indicated that unauthorized access had occurred throughout the facility, but the attack methods were unlike anything in hegemony experience. Captain Thrainvex, the depot commander, stood in his emergency command center and tried to make sense of reports that seemed to describe simultaneous technical failures, computer network intrusions, and explosive sabotage occurring across 17 different locations. His tactical training had prepared him for direct assault, siege warfare, and various forms of conventional military attack, but nothing in hegemony doctrine addressed enemies who disguised themselves as waste management workers and turned routine maintenance procedures into instruments of destruction. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving priority signals from patrol squadrons requesting clarification of our emergency status. They're reporting that our distress calls appear to be originating from multiple sources simultaneously." Commander Vex studied the tactical displays that showed his facility's defensive systems offline, his communications network compromised, and his computer infrastructure corrupted by viral attacks that had somehow been introduced through the waste management system.
"How many enemy ships did our sensors detect approaching the depot?" "None, sir. Our records show no unauthorized vessels in the system."
The only non-military traffic was routine supply deliveries and waste transport operations. The implications of this statement struck Vex like a physical blow. Alliance forces had penetrated his facility without being detected, conducted a coordinated attack that disabled his most critical systems, and escaped without leaving any evidence of their presence except for the devastating effectiveness of their operation. "Send an immediate priority transmission to Fleet Command," Vex ordered. "Report that Arcturus 7 has been subjected to unconventional warfare tactics that appear to represent a significant evolution in Alliance strategic capabilities. Recommend immediate review of security protocols for all supply installations throughout the sector." As the HSV Relentless departed the Arcturus system using the chaos of the depot explosion to mask their sensor signature, Captain Sarah Chen compiled her after-action report with the satisfaction of someone who had just proved that mathematical certainty could be defeated by creative unpredictability. "Mission assessment," she said to her assembled senior staff as they reviewed the operation's results.
"Tactical objectives achieved, strategic impact to be determined by enemy response patterns."
Commander Park looked up from his data analysis with an expression that mixed admiration with concern. "Captain, we've demonstrated that unconventional warfare can be effective against hegemony installations, but we've also revealed capabilities that they'll now take steps to counter." They'll upgrade their security protocols, implement new defensive measures, and modify their tactical doctrine to address the vulnerabilities we've exploited.
Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Which is exactly what we want them to do. Every resource they dedicate to defending against unconventional attacks is a resource they can't use for offensive operations. Every hour they spend analyzing our methods is an hour they're not advancing into Alliance territory.
Lieutenant Okafor raised a strategic concern that had been troubling the communications staff since they departed Arcturus. Captain, our success here will make us a priority target for hegemony forces. They're going to be looking for the ship and crew responsible for this operation.
Good, Sarah replied, her expression becoming predatory. Let them look.
While they're dedicating resources to hunting us, they'll be vulnerable to the real strategic changes we're going to implement. The conversation was interrupted by an incoming transmission from Alliance Command. Admiral Webb's image appeared on the main display, his expression showing a mixture of relief and apprehension as he reviewed the preliminary reports from the Arcturus operation.
Captain Chen, Webb began, I've received confirmation that the Hegemony supply depot at Arcturus 7 has been completely destroyed.
Intelligence indicates they're classifying this as their most significant logistical setback in over 2 years. Sarah remained standing at attention, but her eyes held the confidence of someone who had just validated years of tactical theory through practical application.
Admiral, the operation proceeded according to plan. Detailed reports are being transmitted through secure channels.
Webb leaned forward, his weathered face showing the strain of command decisions that affected millions of lives.
Captain, I need to know if this success can be replicated.
The Alliance Council is asking whether unconventional warfare represents a viable strategy for changing our strategic position in this sector. Sir, Sarah replied, the Arcturus operation was a proof of concept.
We demonstrated that hegemony forces can be defeated through tactics they don't understand and can't predict.
But, more importantly, we've shown that their greatest strength, systematic efficiency, becomes a weakness when they're forced to respond to problems that don't fit their operational parameters.
Admiral Webb was quiet for a moment, considering the implications of what Sarah had accomplished.
Captain, I'm authorizing you to continue unconventional operations, but I need regular status reports. The political situation is becoming increasingly complex, and some of our allies are concerned about the ethical implications of the tactics you've employed.
Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Admiral, the hegemony has made it clear that their goal is complete extermination of non-hegemony life. At what point do ethical concerns become secondary to survival?
That's exactly the question the Alliance Council is debating, Webb replied. Continue your operations, Captain, but remember that we're fighting not just for military victory, but for the principles that make victory worth achieving. As the transmission ended, Sarah turned to her staff with an expression that showed she understood the weight of responsibility that came with rewriting the rules of interstellar warfare. The Arcturus operation had been a tactical success, but it had also marked humanity's transition from conventional military thinking to something far more dangerous and unpredictable. Prepare for Phase 4 operations, she commanded. Target selection, crew training, and equipment modification. We're going to show the galaxy that humans don't just fight wars differently, we fight them in ways that change the fundamental nature of what warfare means. Over the following days, as reports of the Arcturus depot destruction spread throughout both Alliance and Hegemony communication networks, military analysts on both sides struggled to understand the implications of what had occurred. The Hegemony found themselves forced to acknowledge that their enemy had evolved beyond their ability to predict and counter, while Alliance forces began to realize that Captain Sarah Chen had unlocked something that transcended conventional military doctrine. In the highest levels of Hegemony command, emergency meetings were convened to address a threat that couldn't be quantified using traditional military mathematics. For the first time in their species' history, they were facing an enemy that seemed to operate according to principles of chaos rather than logic, unpredictability rather than systematic planning. The human female who had been dismissed as a loose cannon by her own command was about to become the single most dangerous individual in their strategic assessment, but even their most sophisticated analysts couldn't yet comprehend the true scope of what Captain Sarah Chen was planning to unleash upon their carefully ordered empire. Supreme Commander Krex Thalan stood before the assembled War Council of the Hegemony Empire, his scaled hide reflecting the harsh lighting of the command chamber as he delivered the most disturbing intelligence briefing in his species' military history. The holographic displays surrounding the council chamber showed tactical analyses, casualty reports, and strategic assessments that painted a picture of systematic failure that challenged every assumption about their enemy's capabilities. In the past 4 months, Balan began, his deep voice echoing through the cavernous chamber. Alliance forces under the command of a single human female have conducted 17 successful operations against hardened hegemony installations. Supply depots, communication relays, manufacturing facilities, and training centers across 12 star systems have been destroyed or severely damaged through tactics that our analysts describe as systematically unpredictable. The War Council consisted of 12 of the most experienced military commanders in hegemony space, each representing different aspects of their empire's military doctrine. General Vorth, their foremost expert on defensive strategy, leaned forward with an expression of frustrated confusion. Supreme Commander, Vorth said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never lost a strategic engagement, our intelligence reports suggest these operations are being conducted by a single ship with a crew of less than 50 personnel.
How is such a small force achieving strategic results that should require multiple fleet actions?
Balan manipulated the holographic display to show Captain Sarah Chen's service record, tactical analysis profiles, and psychological assessments compiled by their intelligence services. The image that emerged was of a human officer who had been consistently underestimated by her own command structure while demonstrating tactical innovation that bordered on prescient. The human female designated Sarah Chen appears to have developed warfare methodologies that exploit fundamental weaknesses in our operational doctrine, Balan explained. Her attacks target infrastructure we consider too well defended for small-scale operations, using infiltration techniques that bypass our security protocols by appearing to be routine maintenance and supply operations.
Admiral Kresh, the Council's expert on space warfare, studied the tactical reports with growing alarm.
These operations suggest intelligence gathering capabilities that exceed our understanding of Alliance technological development.
How are they obtaining detailed information about our facility layouts, security procedures, and defensive systems?
The answer to this question had been troubling hegemony intelligence services for weeks. Their investigation had revealed that Captain Chen's team was somehow accessing their computer networks through methods that appeared to be routine system maintenance, introducing viral attacks disguised as software updates, and extracting classified information while leaving minimal evidence of intrusion. Our cybersecurity specialists believe the Alliance has developed a new form of electronic warfare that exploits our reliance on automated systems, Balan continued. Rather than attempting to break our encryption or override our security measures, they appear to be convincing our computers to voluntarily provide access by mimicking legitimate system functions. The implications of this statement created a ripple of concern throughout the War Council. The hegemony's military effectiveness depended heavily on sophisticated computer networks that coordinated everything from supply logistics to tactical communications. If Alliance forces could compromise these systems through deception rather than force, then fundamental aspects of their military doctrine were vulnerable to attack. General Kane, the Council's specialist in psychological warfare, raised a strategic concern that had been growing among hegemony forces throughout the sector. Supreme Commander, our field commanders are reporting decreased morale and increased caution among their personnel. The unpredictability of these attacks is affecting decision-making at every level of command. This observation struck at the heart of what made Captain Chen's operations strategically significant. Beyond the immediate damage caused by her attacks, she was introducing uncertainty into a military system that depended on mathematical precision and predictable outcomes. Hegemony commanders who had previously advanced with confidence were now requesting additional reconnaissance, defensive preparations, and backup resources before conducting operations that should have been routine. Our strategic advancement has slowed by 37% over the past month, Balan acknowledged. Field commanders are dedicating increasing resources to defensive measures against unconventional attacks, reducing the forces available for offensive operations.
The War Council fell silent as the members absorbed the full implications of what they were hearing.
A single Alliance ship with an unconventional crew had achieved something that major fleet actions had failed to accomplish. They had forced the hegemony to fundamentally alter their tactical priorities and strategic planning.
Admiral Kresh leaned back in his chair, his expression showing the frustration of a military professional confronting problems that didn't yield to conventional solutions. What countermeasures are being implemented to address these unconventional warfare tactics?
the LAN activated a new set of holographic displays showing enhanced security protocols, revised inspection procedures, and modified communication systems that had been rapidly deployed throughout hegemony space. All installations have been ordered to implement enhanced verification procedures for maintenance personnel, upgrade their cybersecurity systems, and establish redundant communication networks that should be resistant to viral attack. However, he continued, and his tone suggested that the countermeasures were not entirely satisfactory. Implementing these security enhancements requires significant additional personnel and resources. Our operational efficiency has decreased by approximately 15% across all installation types. General Vorth studied the security enhancement reports with growing alarm. Supreme Commander, these modifications represent a fundamental change in our operational doctrine. We're essentially fortifying every installation in our territory against attacks that may or may not occur, based on the actions of a single enemy ship. The truth of this statement highlighted the strategic genius of Captain Chen's approach. By forcing the hegemony to defend against unpredictable attacks, she had achieved something more valuable than destroying individual installations. She had forced them to distribute their resources across a defensive posture that reduced their offensive capabilities. Intelligence assessment indicates that Captain Chen's operations are designed to achieve exactly this result, the LAN confirmed. Rather than attempting to match our military strength directly, Alliance forces are using psychological warfare and systematic uncertainty to reduce our operational effectiveness. The War Council members exchanged glances that reflected their growing understanding of the strategic situation they faced. They were dealing with an enemy who had fundamentally changed the nature of the conflict by refusing to fight according to established rules of engagement. Admiral Kresh raised a question that had been troubling hegemony strategic planners for days. What are our intelligence services able to determine about Captain Chen's future operational plans? Thalen's expression became grim as he accessed classified intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture of Alliance capabilities. Our analysts have identified what appears to be a systematic campaign designed to demonstrate Alliance unconventional warfare capabilities across multiple operational theaters. Captain Chen's ship has been detected in 17 different star systems over the past month, but their movement patterns suggest advanced stealth technology that makes tracking difficult. More concerning, he continued, manipulating the display to show predictive models of future attacks, our strategic analysis indicates that her operations are becoming increasingly sophisticated and coordinated. The most recent attacks suggest she's receiving intelligence and logistical support from sources throughout Alliance territory. General Kane leaned forward with the intense focus of someone recognizing a strategic threat that transcended conventional military analysis. Supreme Commander, are you suggesting that Captain Chen represents more than an isolated unconventional warfare unit? That she's potentially the visible component of a larger Alliance strategic initiative? The question struck at the heart of what made the current situation so troubling for hegemony strategic planners. Captain Chen's operations were too successful, too well coordinated, and too systematically effective to represent the actions of a single rogue commander operating independently. Intelligence indicates that Captain Chen has been granted unprecedented operational autonomy by Alliance Command, the LAN confirmed. Her communications with Fleet Headquarters are minimal and encrypted using methods that suggest direct authorization from the highest levels of Alliance leadership. Admiral Kresh stood slowly, his massive frame conveying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in dozens of successful military campaigns. Supreme Commander, what specific measures are being implemented to neutralize this threat? The LAN activated the chamber's primary tactical display, showing a comprehensive map of hegemony space with marked locations of recent Alliance attacks, projected future targets, and deployed hunter-killer squadrons tasked with locating and destroying Captain Chen's ship. Operation Silent Death has been authorized by the High Command, the LAN announced. 12 hunter-killer squadrons have been deployed with orders to locate and eliminate the Alliance vessel responsible for these attacks. Additionally, all hegemony installations have been placed on maximum alert with orders to implement immediate defensive measures when any unidentified ship approaches their operational perimeter. The scope of resources being dedicated to hunting a single Alliance ship was unprecedented in hegemony military history, but the strategic impact of Captain Chen's operations had forced them to treat her as a threat equivalent to an entire enemy fleet. However, the LAN continued, and his tone suggested significant complications with the hunter-killer operations. Captain Chen's ship appears to be equipped with stealth technology that makes detection extremely difficult. Additionally, her operational patterns suggest intelligence gathering capabilities that allow her to avoid our search efforts. General Vorth raised a tactical concern that had been troubling field commanders throughout the sector. Supreme Commander, dedicating 12 squadrons to hunting a single ship represents a significant diversion of resources from our primary offensive operations.
Are we allowing Alliance psychological warfare to dictate our strategic priorities?
The question highlighted the central dilemma facing hegemony leadership.
Captain Chen's operations were forcing them to choose between maintaining offensive momentum and defending against unconventional attacks that could occur anywhere in their territory.
The High Command has determined that Captain Chen represents a strategic threat that justifies extraordinary countermeasures, the Lan replied. Intelligence analysis indicates that her operations are designed to demonstrate Alliance unconventional warfare capabilities to potential rebel movements throughout our territory.
Failure to neutralize this threat could result in widespread insurgent activity. Admiral Kresh nodded slowly as he absorbed the strategic implications. The human female is not just conducting military operations.
She's conducting political warfare designed to inspire resistance movements and undermine our territorial control.
Precisely, the Lan confirmed.
Recent intelligence reports indicate increased insurgent activity in 7 systems where Captain Chen has conducted operations. Local populations are interpreting her success as evidence that hegemony forces can be defeated through unconventional resistance. The War Council fell silent again as the members contemplated the full scope of the threat represented by a single Alliance officer who had somehow managed to challenge their empire's fundamental assumptions about military power and political control. General Kane broke the silence with a question that would define hegemony's strategic priorities for the remainder of the war.
Supreme Commander, what specific classification has been assigned to the threat represented by Captain Chen and her unconventional warfare operations?
The Lan manipulated the tactical display one final time, highlighting a classification designation that had never before been applied to an individual enemy officer. The holographic text floated in the center of the chamber, clearly visible to every member of the War Council.
The High Command has issued a formal threat assessment designating Captain Sarah Chen as a Class Alpha strategic target, the Lan announced.
Effective immediately, all hegemony forces throughout this sector are authorized to engage her ship with maximum available firepower. Standard rules of engagement regarding prisoner capture and intelligence extraction are waived. He paused, allowing the implications of this designation to settle throughout the chamber before continuing with the statement that would soon be transmitted across every hegemony communication network in the galaxy. Furthermore, the Lan said, his voice carrying the weight of an empire's growing fear, all hegemony personnel are advised that Captain Sarah Chen represents the greatest single threat to our operational effectiveness in this theater.
Priority target designation, eliminate at all costs.
As the War Council concluded its session and began implementing the most extensive manhunt in hegemony military history, none of them could have predicted that Captain Sarah Chen was already planning her most audacious operation yet, one that would demonstrate just how dangerous humans could become when they decided that conventional warfare was no longer sufficient for survival.
Captain Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of the HSV Relentless, watching the hegemony capital fleet conduct exercises in the Proxima Majoris system, completely unaware that their most wanted enemy was observing them from within their own defensive perimeter.
6 months of unconventional warfare had transformed her from a dismissed Alliance officer into the most hunted individual in hegemony space, but, more importantly, it had demonstrated that humanity could fight wars in ways that transcended conventional military doctrine. The irony of her current position was not lost on her. 47 hegemony warships, including 3 Dreadnought-class vessels and their flagship command carrier, were conducting training exercises designed to prepare them for confronting unconventional Alliance tactics. What they didn't realize was that their training scenarios were being observed in real time by the very enemy they were preparing to fight. Captain, Commander Park reported from the bridge, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and concern, "We've been monitoring their training communications for the past 6 hours. They're specifically practicing countermeasures designed to neutralize our infiltration techniques and electronic warfare capabilities." Sarah smiled, the same predatory expression that had become legendary among both Alliance and hegemony forces.
"Good.
Let them prepare for the tactics we used last month. By the time they've developed countermeasures for our previous operations, we'll have moved on to methods they haven't even imagined yet." The past 6 months had seen Captain Sarah Chen's team conduct 23 successful operations against hegemony installations, each one more sophisticated and psychologically devastating than the last. They had destroyed supply depots by convincing automated systems to contaminate their own inventories, crippled communication networks by uploading viral packages disguised as routine software updates, and eliminated manufacturing facilities through sabotage that appeared to be industrial accidents. More significantly, they had forced the hegemony to fundamentally alter their strategic priorities. 12 hunter-killer squadrons were actively searching for her ship, enhanced security protocols had been implemented across thousands of installations, and entire battle groups had been recalled from offensive operations to defend against attacks that might never come. Status report from all teams, Sarah commanded, knowing that the operation she was about to initiate would either demonstrate the ultimate potential of unconventional warfare or result in the destruction of everything she had worked to achieve. Lieutenant Okafor looked up from her communications station with an expression that mixed excitement with apprehension. Captain, all infiltration teams report successful placement within the target vessels. Virus packages have been uploaded to 17 different ship computers, and our Trojan horse protocols are ready for activation. The operation that Sarah had planned was unprecedented in the history of interstellar warfare. Rather than attacking hegemony installations from outside their defensive perimeter, she intended to demonstrate that their most powerful military assets could be turned against themselves through the patient application of electronic warfare and psychological manipulation. Engineering teams report ready, added Ensign Torres from the technical station. Remote access protocols have been established for all target systems. We can initiate cascade failures across the entire fleet when you give the order. Sergeant Major Vasquez approached from the tactical station, her scarred face showing the confidence of someone who had participated in operations that military historians would study for centuries. Captain, assault teams are positioned and ready for Phase 2 operations. If our electronic warfare measures fail to achieve complete fleet neutralization, we're prepared to conduct boarding actions against their command vessels. Sarah studied the tactical display showing the positions of hegemony ships, their training formations, and the locations of her carefully positioned teams throughout their fleet. The plan she had developed required split-second coordination across 17 different vessels simultaneously, but, more importantly, it required the hegemony to make decisions based on incomplete information and psychological pressure. Phase 1, initiate, she ordered. The first indication that something was wrong came when the hegemony flagship's navigation system began reporting minor calibration errors that required immediate attention from technical personnel. Standard procedure called for diagnostic teams to investigate potential equipment malfunctions while maintaining formation with the rest of the fleet. What the diagnostic teams discovered was computer code that appeared to be routine maintenance software but was actually a sophisticated virus designed to gradually compromise their ship's entire electronic infrastructure. By the time they recognized the intrusion, similar viral packages were already spreading throughout their computer network. Admiral Korth reported the flagship's technical officer to the hegemony fleet commander, "We're detecting anomalous readings in our navigation, communication, and weapons control systems. The problems appear to be spreading to other vessels in the formation." Admiral Korth had been expecting something like this. Intelligence reports had warned that Captain Chen specialized in electronic warfare attacks that appeared to be technical malfunctions. He immediately ordered enhanced security protocols and began implementing countermeasures specifically designed to address Alliance unconventional warfare tactics. Isolate all affected systems, Korth commanded. Implement emergency communication protocols and prepare for potential enemy contact. All ships maintain defensive formations and report any unusual activity immediately. What Admiral Korth couldn't have anticipated was that Sarah's team had spent weeks studying hegemony countermeasure protocols and had specifically designed their attack to exploit the procedures he was now implementing. The enhanced security measures he ordered actually accelerated the spread of viral infections throughout his fleet's computer networks. Phase 2, execute, Sarah commanded, watching as the hegemony fleet began to experience system failures that appeared to be the result of their own security protocols. The genius of the operation lay in its exploitation of the hegemony's fundamental trust in their own technology. Their ship's computers were designed to automatically share diagnostic information and security updates with other vessels in their formation.
Sarah's viral packages used this automatic communication to spread throughout the entire fleet while appearing to be legitimate security responses to potential threats.
Within 17 minutes, 47 hegemony warships found themselves experiencing simultaneous failures in their navigation, communication, and weapons systems. More disturbing than the technical problems was the discovery that their own diagnostic systems indicated the malfunctions were being caused by security countermeasures they had implemented to protect themselves against Alliance attack.
Admiral, the flagship's operations officer, reported with barely controlled panic, "We're receiving distress signals from all vessels in the formation.
They're reporting total system failures affecting primary and backup systems simultaneously." Admiral Korth stared at the tactical displays that showed his entire fleet effectively dead in space, their sophisticated military technology turned against itself by an enemy he couldn't detect or target.
"How many Alliance ships are we detecting in this system?" "None, sir. Long-range sensors show no enemy vessels within our operational perimeter.
Our defensive platforms report no unauthorized contacts or infiltration attempts." The implications of this statement created a moment of silence on the flagship's bridge that reflected the growing understanding that they were dealing with warfare capabilities that transcended their military experience. Captain Sarah Chen had somehow attacked and neutralized an entire hegemony battle fleet without revealing the location of her ship or engaging in conventional combat. "Phase 3, initiate," Sarah ordered, knowing that the psychological impact of the next phase would be more devastating than the electronic warfare attacks themselves. Across the hegemony fleet, ship commanders began receiving communication signals that appeared to be coming from their own vessels' computer systems. The messages were brief, direct, and designed to demonstrate the complete vulnerability of their most advanced military technology. "Attention Hegemony Fleet Command," the message began, transmitted simultaneously to every ship in the formation. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Alliance vessel Relentless. Your ship's computer systems have been compromised through viral attacks that were introduced during routine maintenance operations conducted over the past 3 weeks." Admiral Korth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of his command bridge.
3 weeks? She's been infiltrating our ships for 3 weeks? The message continued with information that demonstrated unprecedented intelligence gathering capabilities.
"Admiral Korth, your personal tactical preferences indicate you will attempt to implement Protocol 7 defensive measures within the next 4 minutes. This protocol will result in additional system failures affecting your engines and life support systems."
The accuracy of this prediction was terrifying in its implications.
Captain Chen wasn't just attacking their ships, she was demonstrating that she understood their tactical doctrine better than they understood it themselves.
"All ships," Admiral Korth commanded, "do not implement any defensive protocols until further notice. Maintain current status and await emergency technical teams."
The response came immediately through their compromised communication systems. "Admiral, your decision to suspend defensive protocols is tactically sound but strategically irrelevant. The viral packages currently active in your computer networks will achieve complete system shutdown regardless of your command decisions." Sarah watched the hegemony fleet's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of their ships with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully demonstrated that conventional military power could be neutralized through superior strategic thinking. But, more importantly, she was demonstrating that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't advanced technology or superior numbers, it was the willingness to fight wars in ways their enemies couldn't predict or counter. "Captain," Commander Park reported, "hegemony reinforcement fleets are responding to their distress signals. We're detecting multiple squadrons approaching from adjacent systems."
Sarah nodded, having anticipated this development.
"Transmit our final message to Admiral Korth, then prepare for immediate departure." The final transmission that went out across all hegemony communication networks would be remembered as the moment when the galaxy understood that humanity had evolved beyond conventional warfare into something far more dangerous and unpredictable. "Admiral Korth and Hegemony Fleet Command," Sarah's voice was transmitted directly through their ship's internal communication systems, "your vessels will regain full operational capability in approximately 2 hours. No permanent damage has been inflicted, and no personnel have been harmed. This demonstration was conducted to prove that Alliance forces possess unconventional warfare capabilities that can neutralize your most advanced military assets without engaging in direct combat." She paused, allowing the implications to settle throughout the hegemony fleet before continuing with the statement that would transform her from a wanted fugitive into a legend that would be spoken of in whispers across 1,000 worlds.
Your empire has spent 6 months hunting me because you consider me your greatest danger. You are correct. But, not for the reasons you believe. Another pause, then, the words that would echo through hegemony command centers for years to come.
I am dangerous because I represent what humanity becomes when you force us to fight for our survival. I am dangerous because I have shown the galaxy that your empire can be defeated by enemies who refuse to fight according to your rules. The final words of her transmission would be recorded in military histories as the moment when unconventional warfare transformed from tactical innovation into strategic revolution. You have made me your greatest enemy by underestimating what humans are capable of achieving when we decide that losing is not acceptable. I am Captain Sarah Chen, and I am the future of warfare in this galaxy.
Remember my name, because you will hear it again. As the HSV Relentless departed the Proxima Majori system using stealth technology that made them effectively invisible to hegemony sensors, Sarah's communication went out across every network in known space. Alliance forces received confirmation that unconventional warfare could achieve strategic victories that conventional military doctrine had deemed impossible. Neutral worlds learned that the hegemony's military supremacy was not absolute. Potential rebel movements throughout hegemony space discovered that their oppressors could be defeated by enemies willing to rewrite the rules of engagement. But, most significantly, the hegemony high command received undeniable proof that they were facing an enemy who had evolved beyond their ability to predict, counter, or defeat through conventional means. 3 days later, Admiral Webb stood before the Alliance Council and delivered a report that would change the fundamental direction of the war. Captain Sarah Chen has demonstrated that unconventional warfare represents not just a tactical option, but a strategic transformation that could determine the outcome of this conflict. Her operations have forced the hegemony to allocate significant resources to defensive measures, reduced their offensive capabilities, and inspired resistance movements throughout their territory. He paused, studying the faces of the representatives who would decide humanity's future in this war. More importantly, she has shown that humans possess capabilities that our enemies cannot understand or counter. The question before this council is whether we are willing to embrace warfare methodologies that transcend conventional military doctrine. The debate that followed would continue for weeks, but the outcome was predetermined by the evidence of what Captain Sarah Chen had accomplished. Humanity had discovered that their greatest strength in a galaxy of superior civilizations was not their technology or their numbers, but their willingness to be unpredictable, unconventional, and utterly human in ways that made them more dangerous than any enemy could imagine. 6 months later, when historians began compiling the records of what would become known as the Unconventional War, they would mark Captain Sarah Chen's infiltration of the hegemony capital fleet as the moment when humanity announced itself as the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because they were the strongest or the most advanced, but because they were willing to fight wars in ways that changed the fundamental nature of warfare itself. The girl who had been doubted by allies and enemies alike had become exactly what her enemies feared most, proof that humanity's greatest weapon was humanity itself.